My husband looked at me the night it all collapsed and said 4 words I wasn't prepared for. He said, "I want a divorce, not because of what my son had said, because of what I had done with it." What followed was one of the quietest dismantlings of a marriage I could have imagined. No screaming, no broken dishes, just a man who had decided, calmly and completely, that he was done. By the time I understood what had actually happened, what my son had done, what I had done, and what it had cost all of us, the damage was already structural. This is the story of a lie that lasted less than 24 hours and a marriage that did not survive it. I had been married for 5 years. My husband and I met when my son from my first marriage was 8 years old. The 3 of us had built something that felt, from the inside, reasonably stable. My son had adjusted. There were the usual frictions. A step-parent dynamic is never seamless, but nothing that alarmed me. My husband was not a volatile person. In 5 years, I'd never seen him raise his voice at my son, never seen anything I would describe as aggression. He was measured, consistent, the kind of person who solved problems by going quiet rather than going loud. 8 months before this happened, we had a baby together, a daughter. She was still nursing when everything fell apart. So the household at that point was the 4 of us. My husband, my 13-year-old son, our infant, and me. I was already tired in the way that new mothers are tired, the kind of exhaustion that sits behind your eyes and makes everything feel slightly more urgent than it probably is. I mention that not as an excuse, just as the condition I was operating under when my son came to me one afternoon and told me my husband had slapped him. He said it plainly. He said my husband had hit him across the face. He wasn't visibly upset in the way I might have expected. No tears, no shaking. He was flat about it, almost matter-of-fact, which I registered somewhere in the back of my mind, but didn't stop to examine. Instead, I did what the adrenaline told me to do. I went and found my husband. I didn't ask him. I confronted him. There's a difference, and I knew the difference even in the moment. But I didn't slow down enough to choose the other one. I came at him with the accusation already shaped and solid, and he looked at me with an expression I can only describe as confused. Not guilty confused, not caught confused, but genuinely bewildered. He denied it. He said he hadn't touched my son. I wasn't hearing it. He walked away from me. I told myself he walked away because he couldn't face it. I sat with that interpretation for a few hours. Then, when I had come down enough to use full sentences, I went back to him and said, we needed to talk about it. He looked at me and said something that landed harder than I expected. He said he had no obligation to prove his innocence to me in his own home. He said if I wanted to be angry, I could be angry in another room. So I left. That night I climbed into bed next to him and he told me he wanted a divorce. He wasn't angry when he said it. That was the part that unsettled me most. He was just done. He said my son had lied. He said he didn't care why. Whether it was jealousy over the baby, whether it was some unresolved issue with having a stepfather, whether it was something else entirely. He said he had no interest in diagnosing it. What he knew was that he had been accused of hitting a child in his own house, by a child who lived in that house, and that his wife had immediately taken the accusation as truth. He said he wasn't willing to wait for the next one. He said he was protecting himself. I pushed back. I told him I hadn't decided anything yet. I told him I was going to investigate, that I wasn't going to throw away the marriage over a single accusation without understanding what had actually happened. He looked at me and said that I had already made my position clear. He said the way I had come at him, the tone, the certainty, told him everything he needed to know about where I would land if this happened again. And with a 13-year-old boy in the house and an infant who would take years to be independent, he wasn't willing to live inside that probability. I lay there in the dark next to him, and I started to go back over the details. My son's flatness when he told me, the absence of physical evidence, the way my husband's confusion had read as real rather than performed, the fact that in 5 years I had never seen anything that made me think he was capable of this. I started to feel the ground shift. The next morning, I sat down with my son again. Not to comfort him, to question him properly, the way I should have questioned him before I went and detonated my marriage. I asked him to walk me through exactly what had happened, where they were in the house, what had been said before it. I asked him to describe the physical detail. Which hand? Where on his face? How hard? He started to stall. He gave me answers that didn't connect to each other. He was evasive in a way that a child describing something real is not usually evasive. A child describing something real fills in the edges instinctively. He was leaving every edge blank. I kept going. I stayed calm. I told him I wasn't angry. I just needed to understand. And eventually, sitting across from me at the kitchen table, he broke. He admitted he had made it up. He was crying by the time he got the words out, the kind of crying that comes from relief and shame at the same time. He didn't give me a clean explanation for why. He didn't have one ready. He just said he was sorry. I sat with that for a long moment. Then I went to find my husband. I apologized. I told him what my son had said. He listened. He accepted the apology, acknowledged it, thanked me for telling him. And then he told me it didn't change anything. He said he had thought about it through the night, and his position was the same. He was not willing to continue living in a household where my son was capable of making that kind of accusation and where I was capable of responding to it the way I had. He said it wasn't punishment, it was self-preservation. He moved out within the week. He was organized about it in a way that suggested he had already been thinking about what a clean exit would look like. He took what was his, left what was mine, and found somewhere to stay without asking me to help him figure it out. What I had not fully prepared for was the conversation about our daughter. She was 10 months old, still nursing. He wanted equal custody. I told him that was not practical given that she was still breastfeeding. That equal custody at 10 months, with a nursing infant, was not something I could agree to. He didn't argue with me about the biology. He said that was for a court to decide if I wanted to make it a court matter. He said he would rather not spend the money on lawyers, but he was prepared to. He mentioned a neighbor of ours who had gone through a custody dispute that had financially gutted both parties. He wasn't threatening. He was informing. I understood what he was telling me. He wasn't trying to take my daughter from me out of spite. He was telling me that he was going to be her father in full, and that if I made it difficult, he had the patience and the resources to outlast me legally. He wasn't wrong. He hadn't done anything wrong. A family court was not going to look at a father with no history of any concerning behavior and deny him access to his infant daughter. I knew that. Meanwhile, my son was somewhere between remorse and a kind of stunned silence at what his lie had produced. He was 13. He had not calculated for this outcome. Whatever he had wanted to achieve, and I still don't know with certainty what that was, he had achieved none of it and destroyed a great deal. I got him into counseling within the month, not as punishment, because he needed to talk to someone about whatever was sitting underneath that decision, and I was not the right person to be that someone. I also had to contend with people in my life who had heard fragments of the story. Some of them had opinions. Some of them had expressed those opinions to my husband directly, apparently in support of him, which meant he had people around him talking to him about his decision in ways I wasn't part of. I don't blame him for that. I don't blame any of them. But sitting inside the collapse of something I had built over 5 years, while other people observed it and mostly concluded that the collapse was reasonable, was a particular kind of quiet awful. I went back over the 5 years in my head more times than I should have. I looked for the earlier version of this dynamic, the moments where I had perhaps defaulted to my son's account over my husband's, without examining it. The commenters on the post I'd made had suggested this wasn't the first time. I sat with that. I couldn't identify specific incidents with the same clarity, but I could identify a pattern of instinct. When the two of them were in conflict, my first movement had probably always been toward my son. That's not a crime, but it's also not nothing. 6 months later, the custody arrangement had settled into something functional. My daughter saw her father on a regular schedule. He was attentive, reliable, present in a way that I had always known he would be. He had found a place nearby so the logistics were manageable. We were civil to each other in the way that two people can be civil when there is a child between them, and the anger has burned down to something cooler. My son had continued with counseling. He was making progress, the kind of slow, unglamorous progress that doesn't announce itself but accumulates. He hadn't lied to me, not in any serious way, since the day he admitted to this one. I don't know if that will hold, but it's what I have to work with. The marriage was over. 5 years, 1 infant, and 1 lie that lasted less than 24 hours. My husband had looked at the structure of what we had and concluded that it couldn't hold the weight of what he now knew was possible inside it. He wasn't wrong. I've thought about it enough to know he wasn't wrong. I don't tell this story to villainize my son. He was 13 and confused, and he made a catastrophic mistake. I don't tell it to villainize myself, though my part in it was real. I tell it because the distance between a family that is intact and a family that is not is sometimes just one unexamined moment. The moment where you choose speed over accuracy, certainty over inquiry, reaction over reason. That moment cost me something I can't recover. My daughter will grow up in 2 homes. My son will carry the weight of what he started, and I will spend a long time with the knowledge that I handed the first match to the fire. Some debts don't come with a payment plan. They just come due.